The City of Tacoma's Historic Preservation Office, in association with Pretty Gritty Tours, presents Tacoma Noir.
Ada Kincaid invited Ray Rook for a drink. Tacoma was a dry city like the rest of the U.S., but you could throw a rock in any direction and hit a low-down joint selling bootleg Canadian whiskey and Croatian blackberry hooch by the bucket. Ray escorted Ada outside the Tacoma Hotel and down the street to Whiskey Row, where they got a private booth at the back of the Olympus. Most of these dens in town were run by legit Pete, or Vito Catone. The waiter brought out drinks while the soft jazz from the lower levels drifted up and entangled them.
Mr. Rook, I know who you're looking for.
Ray took a moment to regard the woman before answering. He produced a cigarette and lit the end while looking at her. The momentary flash of his lighter filled the deep emerald pools of her eyes. They were so dark they appeared almost black, but in the lightning flash of fire he could see the rich green in them. Who's that then?
A woman who you cannot reach.
Ray had to admit for a minute she might be a psychic after all. At the moment, Miss Kincaid, I'm looking for a murderer. How do you know the guy in the alley?
I didn't. However, Rebecca did. I am but a medium, able to hear her. I think we can reach out to her and bring an end to these horrible murders.
Rebecca Carr? The dead woman.
The very same.
Rebecca Carr's been dead for 11 years now. I don't think she's taking calls anymore.
As I told you earlier, Mr. Rook, there is more to this world than you know. Join me in my group tonight and you'll see. I have been in contact with Rebecca, and she's warned us that there is a great evil in this city. These murders will not stop until we can find what Rebecca wants.
Ray Rook snuffed his cigarette and downed his drink. You'll have to forgive me, Miss Kincaid, if I rely on what I've done in the past instead of on a ghost. If I don't get to work soon, she won't be the only one in this city. Where were you tonight? Out of curiosity. Ada reached across the table and placed a sable-gloved hand on his. Ray could feel her warmth through the glove and couldn't shake the sensation that it felt more like a panther's paw than a gentle touch. Ada Kincaid slid a small, smooth card across the table to him. On it was carefully scrawled an address and time. 902 North Yakima Avenue, 1 a.m. tonight.
Please, Mr. Rook, meet me here tonight and I can show you the truth.
With that, Ada Kincaid downed her own drink and stood to leave. Like a sharp November wind, she was gone. Ray watched her go and instinctively put his collar up against the cold. Ray had left the Olympus and moved down to Dock Street, where the U.S. Lexington was docked along the Balfour Dock building. If he was going to figure out this one, he needed to establish a timeline and speak to the captain of the Lexington. He had several hours until the 1 a.m. meeting with Ada Kincaid. The tide was low tonight, and the stench of the seafloor, now exposed, left a heavy fog of rot in the air. It didn't seem to have any effect on the jubilant group gathered to see the Lady Lex. As he approached the ship, a complement of Marines stood guard outside the ship. A throng of young women were there, waving to the swarm of young sailors gathered at the rail of the upper deck. Compliments, whistles, and winks were hurled back and forth. The arrival of the Lexington was a joyous event for the city of Tacoma. Though the young dead sailor might disagree, Ray thought. When Ray approached the gangway, he was pushed back by a frantic group of young Tacomans jostling in line to be the first to get tours of the ship. A young woman with a shock of blonde curls and a tall cream-colored coat stumbled roughly into Ray and caught his eye. Flashing a quick, dimpled smile, she hurried quickly back into the mass of people. Ray signaled one of the Marines and explained who he was. The soldier nodded and escorted Ray aboard. The Marine took Ray aboard and to the bridge where the captain was waiting. The man before Ray was clean-shaven, sharp as a razor, with eyes that pierced like javelins. He scanned Ray with a cold and steady look like a battleship rolling through a fog bank and nodded to his Marine. Without offering his hand, he introduced himself.
I'm Captain Frank Berrien of the USS Lexington.
The name's Ray Rook. I'm working with the police to figure out what happened to your officer. Captain Berrien handed a packet of papers to one of the officers by his side and dismissed him. He motioned for Ray to follow him and led him to the next cabin, a simple room with a large table as its main feature. Two Marines posted in the corner moved in unison with the captain, their attention split between him and Ray. Ray couldn't help but feel their eyes bearing down on him like a pack of wolves focused on their prey.
Rook, is it? I'll be very brief. Your Detective Bryn has made it clear to me that this may be more than an isolated incident. I won't tolerate any unsavory behavior from my sailors when they're in port, and I absolutely will not stand for any attack on the U.S. Navy while we are here. You tell me what this was, and I will decide if the city of Tacoma is deserving of our presence here.
I hope to not take up much of your time, Captain. I just need to know when your man left the ship. Once I can figure out his timeline, I should be able to find out what happened to him soon enough.
This matter is one of great importance to myself, Mr. Rook. It's perhaps best that my officers look into it.
With that, he waved his hand.
I understand. I remember that loyalty from France.
Captain Berrien turned to look at Ray.
You were in France?
I was with the 28th when your ship escorted us from Ireland. If you're the same Berrien from the Wilkes. The captain's posture snapped taut like a sail caught in a gale, but his eyes softened.
Black Lion, huh? No wonder you look like you've been kicked in the face since birth.
Both he and Ray laughed.
That was dark work. I would feel better with a soldier who knew action looking into this than those soft drugstore cowboys with badges in this city. I get the sense the lot of them are so crooked you could feed them wire and they'd shit corkscrews. My deck officers will provide you with details on Ensign Ashcraft and when he was signed off the ship. Will you need anything else?
Actually, I'm looking for another one of your officers. Ensign Robert Heinlein.
The captain met Ray's gaze for a moment and narrowed his eyes.
What do you need from Ensign Heinlein?
I think he might have some information about your Ensign Ashcroft.
Captain Berrien nodded and waved to the Marine closest to him.
See that this man gets what he needs. And get Ensign Heinlein up on the flight deck. Mr. Rook.
Yes, Captain?
Find the man that did this.
Ray nodded to the captain and took his leave. Up on the flight deck of the Lady Lex, Ray Rook stood by one of the planes being serviced. The mechanic was running over the engine, inspecting the front of the plane with intense focus. Ray watched him deftly run through the mechanics of the plane and double-check connections and lubrication. Something caught Ray's eye as the man worked, and he moved closer. Looking at the mechanics of the plane triggered something in his memory, and he produced the bolt he found in the alley next to the dead ensign. It matched the same style as the airplane on the deck. Ray waved the young mechanic over.
Hey kid, you recognize this?
He held up the bolt for inspection. The mechanic excitedly scooped it up and examined it. He seemed thrilled to be answering questions, and as the deck of the aircraft carrier was still covered in visiting Tacomans, he must have been waiting for his turn.
Yes, sir, that looks like your standard blind bolt. The kind we use here for planes, but marine grade.
What do you mean?
The young man turned the bolt in the light coming up from the ship and scrubbed some debris and thick black grease off of it.
It's brass. We use steel or aluminum for the birds, sir. Only real reason to use brass would be for a boat of some kind, to prevent corruption from the seawater.
The sound of awkward steps rapping a staccato of hesitation called Ray's attention. He turned to see Ensign Heinlein timidly approaching. Ray took the offered bolt back from the grease monkey.
Thanks, kid.
Hello, Mr. Rook. Sir.
Let's try this again. Tell me what's going on here.
Robert seemed nervous to be overheard and leaned in closer to Ray Rook.
It's like this. Jeez. Listen, I'm a writer. Well, I'm trying to be a writer. I submitted a story for a shipboard contest recently, and I got laughed out of the room. I wanted to write about something big, something important. I overheard the guys saying they were going to this woman in town who could talk to the dead, and well, I followed them.
Ray took out his notepad and began putting down important details. Robert continued.
I didn't think anything of it. It was supposed to be just a good ghost story, but that woman, she started talking to the dead, Mr. Rook. She's the real deal.
Robert Heinlein started spinning like a whipped top.
Slow down, kid. Only ghosts in this town are the dreams of guys like me. Where were you? What was it like?
It was some sort of spiritualist ceremony. All of the people at the table were wearing animal masks, and there were candles. Some big mansion in town. Jesus, we had only been ashore for a few hours.
Ray Rook took out a cigarette and offered it to the ensign. He was shaken like a backroom martini. Robert took the cigarette and produced a book of matches that matched the small book found on the dead man Ashcroft. Robert took a deep drag and seemed to settle like the silt of a lake bed after it's been kicked up.
The room felt wrong, like lightning was about to strike. That woman started speaking, but it stopped sounding like her. She told the group that the dead would rise up and that the Lexington wasn't welcome here, that someone would die every night until it left. Then she said his name.
Robert started shaking again.
Then she said my name. Jesus, mister, I laughed. I laughed right then because I didn't know any of them. It had to be a lark, but she stopped in the moment and looked right at me from across the room in the dark. She looked through me. Her eyes were black, and I saw the depths of hell in them. She pointed her finger right at me. I got out of there. I was shaken, but when I was coming back to the ship, I saw him.
Who?
Ensign Ashcroft. Like she said. And now it's me. I'm next.
Ray Rook put away his notebook and put a hand on the ensign's shoulder. From down below, Ray had caught sight of a man along the dock staring up at the two of them. He was apart from the rest of the group, and his face was only lit by the weak glow of a cigarette. Ray looked down at him for a moment before the man pointed up at him and Ensign Heinlein. As the brim of his hat turned skyward, Ray noticed that it looked like his face was featureless. Ray pushed Robert Heinlein back away from the edge of the flight deck. Stay out of sight, kid. Don't leave this ship. I'm going to find out what happened to your friend. Ray Rook had left the USS Lexington behind and went down to the far edge of a pool of light that shone down from the lights aboard the Lady Lex, near where he had seen the mystery figure. As he went, he checked the Colt 1911 tucked along his chest. The figure was gone. Ray moved away from the group of excited women. Only a few of them still remained pooled outside the gangway of the Lexington. Most had taken young sailors to dance halls by this point in the evening. All along the north end of the waterfront, the old grain warehouses stood empty, the cold windows staring blank and blind out at the world. Up on the hill, the City Hall clock tower perched above the waterfront. The steady rush of the tide coming in played along the pilings. Ray still had a couple of hours before he had to go see Ada Kincaid and determine what she was up to. So far, he couldn't find the free end of this tangled mess. Every thread kept turning back in on itself. He heard a shuffling sound coming from one of the warehouses along the waterfront and moved towards it. As he approached, he found a heavy sliding door slightly ajar. He moved to the gap and looked inside. The cavernous space inside was still and stale. Ray gave the heavy door an experimental jerk and it rolled surprisingly easy, but with a metal shriek that tore the heavy fabric of stillness that lay over the night. Ray heard footsteps inside and he swiftly produced his Colt from under the coat. Reaching for the sturdy metal flashlight he kept in his coat pocket, he pulled it out and let the beam carve open the shadows that filled the warehouse. Inside, he saw only empty wooden floors and boxes. The sound of rushing water roiled through the building, and Ray noticed it sounded louder in the far corner. He moved into the warehouse and cut across the floor. As he came closer to the far corner of the building, he saw that there was a hatch in the floor. He let his flashlight beam flood the hatch with light, and he brought the barrel of the pistol up to guard his approach. From behind a thick wooden beam by the hatch, Ray heard a voice. It was a nasally whine like an unserviced serpentine belt.
You don't belong here, pal.
I got 8 reasons chambered right here that disagree. Why don't you step on out and introduce yourself?
How's about I use you for fish bait?
An explosion of shots burst out from behind the beam and splayed all across the warehouse. Ray rolled over to a large wooden beam to his left and squeezed off 2 shots as he snapped off the flashlight. Another eruption of frantic bullets went wide. The voice behind the beam didn't seem to have any ability to aim. Ray hazarded a quick peek from around the beam and saw a dark shadow drop down the hatch. Ray waited a beat, then crept along the side of the warehouse and moved towards the hatch. A deep rumble growled from beneath the dock, and a plume of dark exhaust bellowed up from the hatch. Ray heard a wild throttle roar up from down below. As he looked out the window, he heard something streak away on the water, but couldn't see it. Ray ran back across the warehouse and up to the large metal door where he almost ran into a young woman who was outside in a cream coat framed by golden blonde locks. Ray hastily put his Colt snugly back in the holster, hidden away inside his coat.
Lady, what are you doing out here? It's dangerous out on the docks at night.
Ray looked behind him, but whatever had streaked across the water was long gone. He had a second to try and figure out what could move so fast across the sound like that. When he turned back to the young woman he had almost run into, first thing that hit him was the deep dimples around her brilliant smile. A smile so bright he wondered if it could light the city of Tacoma through this dark winter. The second was he saw the tip of a snub-nosed revolver peeking out of her gloved hand, leveled right at his heart.
Dangerous indeed, but mostly only for scumbags like you.
Ray Rook stood shell-shocked for a second.
Listen, sweetheart, I think you've got the wrong guy. Let me get my credentials.
I'll tell you what. You reach inside your coat, and I'll put 2 in your chest. I can just as easily check your ID once you're on a slab downtown.
The woman took out a pair of handcuffs and tossed them to Ray.
Why don't you try on those bracelets for me, sweetheart? I got them just for you.
Ray caught the cuffs and was almost knocked down by the bitter chill beneath her smile.
Aren't you going to at least introduce yourself, now that we're going steady?
With her free hand, the young woman produced a small red leather folder and flipped it open. Inside was her picture, the official seal of the United States Treasury, and the clean words, Federal Prohibition Agent.
I am Special Agent Rachel Parker, and I'm about to ruin your life. Unless you help me find the rest of your outfit.
Listen, doll, you've collared the wrong guy here. I'm Ray Rook, a PI working here in Tacoma. The guy you're looking for just slipped the noose and streaked off across the water.
Special Agent Rachel Parker was steady as a bass note, and her finger was wrapped on the trigger like a snake coiled to strike. She smiled that lethal flash of teeth at Ray again, and this time he felt more like he was seeing a wild animal bare its teeth than a young dame trying to flirt.
No doubt. And your friend Frankie Fishhouse there was just being neighborly and helping you pack inside. Cuff yourself to the bar.
Agent Parker pointed to an iron bar bolted along the side of the warehouse with her chin, never moving the end of the revolver. Ray obliged. Once he cuffed himself to the side of the building, Agent Parker moved closer to him.
I'm going to reach inside your pocket now.
By all means, dame.
Agent Parker put the end of the revolver right underneath Ray's chin and reached inside his coat. She grabbed the Colt 1911 and stuffed it in her coat pocket before returning for his billfold. She took it out and flipped it open. There was Ray's face, next to a nickel-slick badge stamped Private Detective.
Jesus, you really are a PI. Are you Tacoma boys this sloppy?
Sad to say, I might be the best we have to offer. I have to admit, you're my first lady hooch hunter.
It looks like I was almost your last.
Agent Parker took out a small key from her pocket, unlocked Ray's handcuffs, and handed him back his ID. As Ray rubbed his wrists, he looked Agent Parker up and down. She had the easy charm and energy of a fresh mountain spring. Her blonde hair made easy curls that bounced with her own life. Her face was fierce and proud. She stood about 5'6" and was a whispered breeze of a dame at first glance, but Ray could see she was a line pulled taut and ready to jump into action at a moment's notice. And my piece? Agent Parker looked at Ray again and seemed to weigh the fabric of his soul for a moment.
Why don't you tell me why you're down here mucking up my case? And then I'll return your hardware, Ace.
Fair enough. I'm looking into the murder of a sailor from the Lexington.
I think we may be chasing the same guy. I was tasked to Tacoma with the Lexington to ensure that the Catone outfit wasn't corrupting America's finest. I almost had the noose on him before you came along and muddied the waters.
Vito Catone was Tacoma's most ruthless crime boss. His operation had its tendrils in every aspect of Tacoma, from soliciting protection money from local joints to buying off politicians, having his finger on the whole machine, and providing the finest Canadian whiskey to Tacoma that he could get smuggled in. Ray had often come in contact with the Catone outfit, but wouldn't have ever gone up against him directly. Half the police force had to be working for Vito, and who knows how many of the city's elite were in his pocket.
Listen, I think you might be treading beyond your depth here.
I was the star of my ladies' swim team. You just try to keep up and not get yourself killed.
Agent Parker flashed her easily practiced smile and handed Ray his pistol back. Ray Rook considered the woman for a moment as he replaced the weapon in its holster.
I think there's someone we should go speak to.
Who's that?
A dead woman.
Ray Rook had hailed a taxi once they got off Dock Street, and he and Agent Parker soon arrived at the massive, columned front door of the mansion formerly owned by Mr. William Rust, the smelting millionaire. They called this place the White House of the West, but it may as well have been a mausoleum. The Rust family abandoned it after their oldest son died, but rumors had swirled that William had offed his own son inside the home. The luck of this place hadn't improved recently either. In 1919, wealthy Tacoma businessman Orville Billings owned the home when he took his own life inside. Most recently, it served as an apartment building, with the 18 rooms being used as separate units. It was state-of-the-art, with a variety of modern conveniences designed to make living here more comfortable, but it seemed like dying was the only thing the house was made for. Rumor was a wealthy gentleman at Tacoma's higher echelon had purchased it and was about to convert it into a private residence again. Each of the rooms currently stood empty. Tonight, though, it was dark and foreboding, lit only by candlelight. When Ray and Rachel arrived, they made a line for the front door. It was midnight, and there were others arriving at the mansion as well. Most of them in black dresses and tuxedos.
Looks like we're underdressed for the evening.
As they knocked on the door, a butler arrived and asked them for an invitation. Ray produced the small card that Ada Kincaid had given him. The butler examined it, and when he seemed satisfied, ushered them inside. The home was dark, but all throughout, several black candles were lit, and servants in black outfits drifted about it with silver trays loaded with drinks. Ray could see Agent Parker stiffen, as if her hackles were raised. Ray assumed she was straight and narrow, a true believer for the Prohibition cause. Together, they combed through the home. There were dark corners all throughout, and half the people there were wearing either white masks or elaborate black ones shaped like bulls, goats, and birds. A group of anonymous beaked faces turned to follow Ray and Agent Parker across the dining hall when a silver bell pierced the dark energy of the home. The servants set their trays down as one and began to usher all the guests towards the ballroom. The ballroom was in the basement, and as the guests descended a short flight of stairs, they had to move past a small, recessed orchestra pit tucked into the back wall. When Ray and Rachel stepped into the ballroom, a man Ray recognized moved up to him. It was the city attorney, Ralph Roberts.
Ah, Detective Bryn's pet. I see even you have come to witness the power of Miss Kincaid.
I'm willing to see what she's got. She gave me a very convincing invitation.
I think you'll soon see that she will solve this murder and get our city back to the way it should be. I doubt we'll have need of your services past this evening.
Ralph Roberts moved past Ray into the edge of the room. A gong clashed like the low roll of thunder, and the group fell silent. In the center of the room was a large oval table, surrounded by high-backed ornate chairs of carved mahogany. From the back corner, Ada Kincaid materialized from the shadows. She moved silently across the floor towards the table.
Ladies, gentlemen, friends, we've all gathered here with the same intent. Tonight we will reach across the veil and contact the other side.
Ada Kincaid descended to the head of the table like a dark fog. Her eyes caught the flickering light of the candles throughout the room. As she took her seat, several people that Ray recognized moved from the dark, impenetrable edges of the room where the candlelight couldn't reach and joined Ada at the table. Councilman Walter Baldwin was on the far end of the table. He caught Ray's eye and nodded to him. Along the side of the table, Ray also recognized millionaire and aspiring magician Ray Gamble. Towards the end of the table, Ralph Roberts moved to take his seat next to Ada's side. High-profile members of society were in attendance. Some members in the room were masked, but most who sat at the table, including a few naval officers in uniform, were all barefaced and bewitched by the enigmatic woman who crowned the head of the table. Ray and Agent Parker stood along the side wall. Ada raised her hand, and the light whispers of the anxious group were still.
Everyone join hands.
Ada closed her eyes and bowed her head. All the people around the table linked hands and looked down the table at Ada.
Rebecca, we ask for your help. Please come to us tonight. Speak, and let us know what the dead would have us know.
The silence thickened. A moment passed and the tension began to swell in the room.
Rebecca, we beg for your insight. Speak through me. Tell us what you wish. What does our future hold?
Someone along the table muffled a cough. Suddenly, Ray felt the hair along his neck begin to stand up. The room felt colder, and the candles flickered. A woman stifled a scream. There was a high-pitched sound like a violin string being tuned too tightly. An acrid smell wafted slowly past Ray as Ada continued.
Rebecca, we are here. Reveal yourself to us. Tell us what our future holds.
The voice of a woman could faintly be heard. It was a low murmur, but the people all around the table started to look around and whisper to one another frantically. The chill in the air somehow got colder and seemed almost like a dense fog began to fill the room. The table in the center was shaking, thrumming noticeably like a deep vibration. Ray felt lightheaded. He looked over at Agent Parker, who had blanched white, but wouldn't tear her eyes away from Ada Kincaid. Ada, for her part, had not opened her eyes, but was rocking slightly back and forth. Suddenly, a flash, and there above the table shimmered a woman, dressed in black, high-collared. Her penetrating gaze seemed to look at everyone all at once. The woman, or the image of the woman, flashed and blackened and folded in on itself. A cold wind blew through the room and Ada threw her head back. She began to speak in a low voice.
The Lexington darkens our port and poisons our water. Every day the cold hands of the dead will choke this city. No one is safe from their grasp. I will claim one life tonight and another tomorrow. Robert Heinlein, Johnny Turner, Tommy Rhodes.
At the mention of Tommy Rhodes, a large man with a walrus mustache stood abruptly at the far end of the table. "Now see here!" Ralph Roberts raised his hands.
Everyone, please, remain calm.
A woman screamed. Ada Kincaid slumped forward and her head fell to the table. A strange metallic sound ripped through the air and the candles blew out. A commotion of people in the room erupted into chaos. Ray was trying to see Ada when Agent Parker pushed past him. She made a beeline for the stairs, and in the dark of the ballroom, he saw her speed up towards the main hall. Ray gave pursuit, and he shoved past several masked figures to catch up. He made it to the top of the stairs, and down the hallway was the dark silhouette of Rachel Parker, framed by the brilliant flash of muzzle fire as 3 rounds went off. Ray produced his Colt and leaned against the wall. After a beat, he moved towards Agent Parker, who was standing in the doorway, a revolver in hand, still smoking. Outside, there was only a dense fog, crawling across the yard.
Jesus, what is it?
Rachel Parker was staring wildly into the fog, breathing heavy.
I had him.
Who?
Vito. He was here. I mean, he was there, right there.
Ray Rook looked out into the dense fog but didn't see anyone. He could hear the wild footsteps of someone coming up behind them. Moving fast, he wrapped his arm around Agent Parker and pushed her out the door.
No time for that. Let's get you out of here.
Ray didn't have time to follow up on that plan. Between the darkness and the fog, he never saw the club coming. Everything just went black.
Thank you for joining us for part 2 of Tacoma Noir. Be sure to tune in for part 3, A Dead Man Speaks. Tacoma Noir is brought to you by the City of Tacoma's Historic Preservation Office and Pretty Gritty Tours.